We have major breaking legal news. The Trump Justice Department has now indicted former FBI Director James Comey. This is in Virginia by a grand jury tonight. He is charged with 2 criminal counts. MSNBC reporting those charges. ABC News reporting the 2 counts are false statements and obstruction of justice. We do not have the actual indictment paper yet, and this is a developing breaking story. It also comes after reports of unusual and extreme pressure from the president on that department's office, basically after the acting U.S. attorney for that same district departed, and allegedly there is internal memoranda that doubted whether this new indictment of James Comey should even go forward. Prosecutors reportedly finding there was insufficient evidence. But now, former FBI Director Comey indicted tonight, capping a many-year saga of his criticism and clashes with President Trump and questions hanging over the validity of this kind of case. I'm joined by MSNBC Justice correspondent Ken Dilanian. Ken?
Ari, good to be with you. So the indictment, we just got word that it happened. It was handed down by this grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia after the case was presented to the grand jury for several hours this afternoon, we are told. And the 2 counts, as you mentioned, making false statements and obstruction of justice. We don't have the details, so we don't know if it's, as we have assumed, that it would be connected to the statement that James Comey made to the Senate 5 years ago that was closing in on the statute of limitations lapsing on Tuesday. That was a statement where he was asked whether he had authorized leaks to the media, and he said he did not. And there was an account given by his deputy, Andrew McCabe, that differed from that. This has been known for years, by the way, and explored in an Inspector General report, among other things. We are reporting that career prosecutors in that office did not believe there was enough evidence to proceed with this case. And they even wrote a memo to the acting U.S. Attorney, Lindsay Halligan, saying as much and saying that not only do they not think they could get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt from a jury, but they said that there wasn't probable cause to move forward with the case, which is the standard for a grand jury indictment. But obviously this grand jury found otherwise. Of course, as our viewers probably know, the grand jury process is essentially a tool of prosecutors. Right. Grand jurors do not hear from the defense. They don't hear from the defendant. They hear only what the prosecutors want them to hear. And so, you know, there's an old saying that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. And in this case, they've indicted the former FBI director on false statement charges that a lot of people think are specious.
This is an extraordinarily unusual process that led up to this. The President of the United States publicly calling for the Comey indictment by name, interfering or meddling. It could be a case for selective prosecution, but you need more evidence. We need to learn more. But the breaking news tonight, 2 counts, false statements and obstruction, and the unusual lead up. Where does that put this case? What footing is it on going forward, given that extraordinary intervention by Donald Trump and him all but admitting that he wanted this done, that he wanted this against what he views as a foe, separate from perhaps the legal evidence?
Oh, extraordinary is a good word for it, Ari. It's unprecedented. We've never seen this before in post-Watergate American history and probably pre-Watergate American history. A president publicly calling for his Justice Department to charge particular individuals. That's what happened. And then this particular individual, James Comey, was charged. And it happened after the U.S. attorney in this district, who had been appointed by Donald Trump and who we have reported was raising questions about this case, was forced out of office by Donald Trump. So the stage is set here for a federal judge to take a look at this and say that this was not appropriate. But you're right, that's an argument, a legal argument that James Comey's lawyers will have to make to the judge that draws the case, and they'll have to present evidence. And a lot, I think, will depend on the strength of the evidence in this indictment. Because as you know, vindictive prosecution is one matter. That's not something that goes before the jury. If the case is strong enough, oftentimes that can be overcome because essentially, if the evidence is there, the mindset of the prosecutor is less important. In this case, we believe the evidence is thin, and there's ample evidence that Donald Trump orchestrated this matter by replacing the U.S. attorney and then lobbying his attorney general.
Yeah, and as you say, pressure on the Attorney General and changing the person in charge of an office that, according to reporting, had recently come to the opposite conclusion. There wasn't a case. Ken, reporting on a major development. Please stay with us. I want to bring in former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, who has overseen exactly such an office for the Department of Justice. Your response to this news tonight?
Well, of course, I think people are stunned given the president's involvement in this case and Ken's reporting that senior prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia felt the case shouldn't go forward. But Ari, we haven't seen the indictment yet. There is some reporting that it's a 2-count indictment. It will be important to see the substance of those charges before we evaluate them. And of course, to see the opening moves that Comey's legal team makes in response to this.
When you look at the legal team's opening response, where would they want to start? Walk us through that process. And given the primacy of former FBI Chief Comey, who ultimately testified basically about Donald Trump's efforts to then take what he called more direct control or possible interference with law enforcement, with the FBI that he ran. Now he's on the other end of that arm, the DOJ and the FBI. What would be the first steps we're going to see next from his side?
So full disclosure, I've never been a criminal defense lawyer, but I've worked with plenty of them. And I think that they'll look both at the substance of the case. They'll want to understand what the charges are. They'll want to get discovery. A very important issue when you've got prosecutions involving false statements and obstruction is that the statements that a defendant is charged with making have to be material. That means they have to be important to the outcome of the proceeding that they were made during. So there will be that focus. They'll get discovery pretty early in this case. The Eastern District of Virginia is a rocket docket. Things move very quickly there. So they'll be looking for that information.
And as you're saying that, I'm going to tell, pardon my interruption, Joyce, I'm going to tell viewers, we just saw a few people run out of that very courthouse. We can't say from witnessing it whether they're running for this or a different case, of course. I don't know yet. But you are seeing some activity there that is later than normal hours. They're approaching the 7 p.m. hour. And we are awaiting, of course, getting the paper. If there's an indictment, that's a government process. It'll be released according to normal course. So we're seeing some flurry of activity there. Joyce, please continue your point.
Yes, that suggests that the clerk's office has just docketed something that was of interest to people who may not have accessed it on the government's PACER system. We'll see if that was the indictment itself. The other thing that the defense will be interested in this case, of course, will be pursuing what you and I talked about earlier, this idea that there might be motions to dismiss any prosecution because of selective and vindictive prosecution. Those should likely play out before a trial would be set in this case. Those will be among the sorts of preliminary motions that whichever judge this is assigned to will consider.
We have a brand new statement posted online from the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. As recently as today, there were reports that she was also doubtful about this case. While she doesn't mention it by name, I'll read exactly what you see here. No one is above the law. Today's indictment reflects DOJ's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American public. That is how she puts it. Again, the effort on and the attention on misleading, that rising, according to the DOJ indictment, to what they're going to argue is a criminal level. A false statements charge, which Joyce Vance, you were just explaining, requires meeting a certain bar of materiality. We don't have the indictment yet, but the reporting prior was that this was reference to Comey answering a question about the general news and leaks policy at DOJ and basically whether he was fully briefed on Clinton-related matters. With our final 30 seconds, your final thoughts.
Well, look, I think this is a good moment for us to all, before we jump to conclusions, wait to see the indictment, wait to see the response from Jim Comey's team. There are still barriers in the criminal justice system that prevent miscarriage of justice. A grand jury has decided that they will issue an indictment here, apparently. But there are other issues going forward, including a judge and a jury. Let's let the system work like it's intended to.
Right.
Today, one of Donald Trump's most prominent critics from very early in his first term, James Comey, the former director of the FBI, a guy who refused to turn the Bureau into Trump's personal plaything, has now been indicted on 2 federal charges. The case was brought to a grand jury by a former Trump attorney that he handpicked to be a prosecutor just days ago and who has never prosecuted a case in her life. Joining me now, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Democrat of Texas, who serves on the Oversight Committee. Congresswoman, I know before you served in Congress, you were in the state legislature. Before that, you were a defense attorney practicing in Texas. As a defense attorney, this seems like a pretty good case to get.
Absolutely. This is an opportunity for someone to make a name for themselves because inevitably, if they are halfway competent, they should be able to win. They should push this thing to the limit. When you were just having your conversation about whether or not the defendant should then start pushing for, say, a speedy trial, which is something that is actually codified on the federal level, and it is actually very quick. Last time I checked, it's 60 days. So, yeah, I would absolutely push forward and say, let's go. And I think they're going to have a harder time trying to figure out who's going to actually prosecute the case than he will have trying to find somebody to defend the case.
We've seen just this week, I mean, we had the FCC threatens Jimmy Kimmel and threatens both the local affiliates and Disney to take him off air. Ultimately, he comes back. The president threatening George Soros today. Reid Hoffman, another individual who's a liberal software rich guy, saying, tossing out their names, signing an executive order, talking about criminal investigations of the funders of, left-wing domestic terrorists. He has been talking about you a lot. He seems sort of somewhat obsessed with you and likes to hurl a lot of insults your way. What do you make of the developments of this week in terms of this regime trying to criminalize dissent?
Yeah, so here's the thing. I want the American people to know that when you stand up to a bully, you win. Do not back down. Do not bend. You allow them to go and wage their threats. If everybody starts to bend, for sure, what is left of our democracy will be gone. And unfortunately, that is exactly what he wants. And even more sadly, is that many of his followers agree with this. And I am thinking to myself, how is it that you can call yourself American or patriotic when you literally don't understand who we are as Americans, when you literally are okay with throwing out the Constitution, when you're okay with someone just deciding, you know what, this is the end result that I'm seeking, and so just figure out how to get there versus doing what you are supposed to do. And I am so appalled at those that took an oath, at those that actually went to law school. Many of us ended up with law school debt. And then we have to take not only the bar exam, but we have an ethics exam that we have to take, because there is supposed to be some level of ethics in what we do when we go into a courtroom. Now you have people that literally either they just don't know the law or they just don't care. But the idea that you would go after someone, and listen, even as Democrats, we had our fair share of issues with James Comey, okay? But that's not a reason to prosecute someone. And so here's the deal. If he decides that he wants to continue down this path, I think that they're going to continue to lose. And I don't see the former FBI director saying that he is going to just go ahead and say enter into a plea deal, or he's just going to take this line down. I think that this is someone who absolutely will fight this to the end.
Yeah, it's a good point. I should note that he has a defense attorney, Patrick Fitzgerald, former U.S. attorney, former special attorney, special counsel. He also successfully prosecuted Rod Blagojevich, other politicians as well. He was the one appointed by George W. Bush as a special counsel during the Scooter Libby investigation. Final thing to you is the Jimmy Kimmel thing broke through in a way that maybe him going after, say, Lisa Cook, the Fed governor, didn't quite. Do you think this breaks through? Is this the kind of thing that people talk about on the grocery store line, in barbershops, et cetera? Be honest.
I don't know. If I'm being perfectly honest with you, I don't know. As someone who has traveled this country and talked to people on a very granular level, I think You know, and I love Jimmy Kimmel. I do. I've done his show twice. But him having the notoriety
yes, exactly.
And the popularity that he had was very helpful, right?
Yeah.
I do think that there are those of us that are always in the weeds, that we look at what happened to Lisa Cook, who won as well, that we look at this situation as with James Comey. I think that there were those that, you know, even when we talk about Colin Kaepernick, you know, one of the things that I've been trying to make sure that people understand is that Colin Kaepernick, that was our first inkling that this was going to be someone that would use his governmental powers to go after free speech. But we kind of shrugged it off. Either you agreed with what he was talking about or you didn't, and you let it go. And that's not what speech is supposed to be about. It's not whether or not you agree. It's whether or not you are able to do it freely.
It is a really dark, sad, scary day for America, and that post that you just showed is truly petrifying. The President of the United States ordered criminal charges against an individual who happens to be a political adversary and a critic of him. And let's be clear about what's happening here. The president is singling out someone he just doesn't like. And that post that you just showed could create a defense, maybe even grounds for dismissal. I spent most of my life in law enforcement. I was the U.S. attorney in Connecticut for 4.5 years. We were very careful about what we said on charges because they could be used against us in a criminal trial. And this case is replete with Donald Trump telling the attorney general to act fast, and creating possible defenses here. But let's look at the broader picture. I always felt as a prosecutor, the most consequential decisions I made were whether to charge someone. People simply don't fully recover from criminal charges, even if they are acquitted, because half the world believes that they were acquitted on some kind of technicality. Well, Donald Trump is populating the Department of Justice with lawyers who will do his bidding, pervert the rule of law, and single out people that they may not like, who may have offended them, or maybe adversaries politically, whether it's a small business person or a public official. Today it's Comey, tomorrow it could be you.
Senator, you have so much that led up to this moment, and I'm curious how you see your colleagues in the Senate, especially in the Judiciary Committee, who have oversight of Justice Department and have a real interest in the types of prosecutors that are being put forward and how these departments are run. When you see this heavy hammer, this sort of forced indoctrination, you've got to plead, your case before Donald Trump before you plead it before a judge, that kind of thing. You have Eric Siebert, who declined to prosecute, quit, it was fired because he wouldn't do what Trump wanted him to do. He brings in his personal insurance lawyer to go and push this thing in front of a grand jury. What is the Senate's reaction, or what should the Senate's reaction be in this moment? Because this deconstruction of our justice system, at some point, someone's got to make it stop. And I would think that's where the Senate would come in.
And my colleagues have to draw a line. My Republican colleagues have to grow a spine here. For a decade, I have been waiting time after time, the Mueller report, the impeachment trial, again and again, for Republicans to say it is a bridge too far.